Hi, I'm Doug McLeroy, Parish Associate for Pastoral Care here at First Presbyterian Church, and I've been asked by the Agape class to say a few words about my experience as an Army chaplain. It really starts in the home. My father was a 21-year-old first sergeant during World War II, and came back with that as his history, and so I grew up in a family that knew something about what it was to serve in the military. And so I was shaped by my family, by the family values, by my grandfather. Also the church was a very important part of our lives. And the church that we worshiped in had a very active youth group. I mean, we were down there just like every night of the week sometimes, and so it was always something going on. In addition to that, we had a Boy Scout troop, and so the veterans became the Boy Scout leaders, and so again I'm surrounded by people who have served in the military. So as I entered high school, I got active in the ROTC program. They had ROTC there at Atlanta, Georgia in high school, and I enjoyed that and felt like that fit me like a glove, and so that was kind of my future leaning. As I graduated, though, I was ready to go into the military, and well, of course it's 1965, Vietnam is growing, and I was ready to go in the military. My mother sat me down and told me I wasn't going anywhere until I did at least 2 years of college. So I started college at Georgia State University, which was downtown Atlanta, and my second year I began to really reflect and discern what God was wanting me to do with my life. And as I reflected on that and I talked with my church people about that, the call for ministry seemed to be emerging in my life. And I talked to my pastor about that, and he said he knew it all along, which was very confirming. But I wasn't quite sure of which form of ministry to belong to. I really didn't feel like I wanted to be preaching in a church, because honestly I did not really want to talk in front of a crowd of people. That was the last thing I wanted to do. So as I prayed about this and thought about it over a period of time, the conviction came to me that I was being called to be an Army chaplain, which meant for me that I would learn all I could of both worlds, of the theological world and also of the military world. So at Georgia State University, I enrolled in their ROTC program, and had a lot of good luck with that, and was the cadet battalion commander of one of the battalions my senior year. Graduated a distinguished military graduate, and was offered a regular Army commission, which meant that you're on for as long as you're going to be on, forever. And they said that in those days, this is 1969, they said you have a choice of 3 branches of the military: armor, artillery, or infantry. And I thought, well, I'll take infantry if I have to do that. But I talked with the ROTC department, and they told me that the only way I could go to seminary would be to write to the Department of the Army and ask for that, tell them that I wanted to be a chaplain. So I did, and to everybody's surprise, it came back approved. And so the Department of the Army told me to go to seminary, report my grades, and they would allow me to have a delayed active duty so I could become a chaplain. Now, all denominations endorse their clergy to the military. It's you represent a particular group. Although you're endorsed by a particular denomination, of course you serve all soldiers, all religious backgrounds and no background. So my particular denomination asked for 2 years experience as a pastor in addition to a seminary degree. So after seminary, I went to eastern part of North Carolina and pastored a small country church for about 2 years. And then one day the phone rang, and this was May of '75, and they asked if I could come on active duty. They needed chaplains. It was after Vietnam, or at least they were drawing down the troops in Vietnam. But they needed to bring on young chaplains then in order to have old chaplains later. So I reported to active duty in May of 1975 to Fort Hood, Texas. And Fort Hood, Texas is kind of a semi-desert place. It's the home of the 1st Armored Division, the 2nd Armored Division, and the 1st Cavalry Division. And the 1st Cavalry Division is the old horse and soldier routine that you see on television back in the Indian Wars. But when I reported in, I was assigned to 1st Cav Division. And I was placed in a battalion, the 1st to the 5th Battalion. And during those days at Fort Hood, Texas, they had a mission they called Brigade 75. And what that was we still had the Iron Curtain across Europe, and the threat was still the Fulda Gap, where the Soviets would pour through their armor. And so in order to beef up firepower, they would rotate a brigade of soldiers over there at a time. And a battalion is about 1,000 soldiers. And so we had 3,000 soldiers at one time on that border to reinforce things. And they were rotating a battalion at a time. You'd deploy, stay there 6 months, and then come back to the United States. So I deployed with 2 different battalions to do that mission, and thoroughly enjoyed it. I hated being away from my family because in those days the children were small, and you just hated to be away. And of course, means of communication were not as they are now. We had monthly phone calls, we sent back and forth cassette tapes, wrote a ton of letters, and that's how most of us stayed in touch. The ministry to the soldiers was ongoing. In fact, the culture of the military kind of says to a soldier, if you have a problem, see the chaplain. And so most of the chain of command will reflect that to a soldier if he has a problem. So I always had soldiers coming to see me about one thing or another. And you know, they don't come in with the same kind of issues or problems that you would see in a church. It is without end the things that they can come up with and the questions that they have. And so the good thing is the chaplain is there. And so I was a chaplain into 1,000 men, just me and 1,000 folks, plus of course they had the chain of command, the officers. At the conclusion of Fort Hood, I asked to go to school. At Fort Hood they had clinical pastoral education, and CPE is a form of education that's normally done after you have been out of seminary a few years. It's an ongoing professional training in terms of looking at yourself, in terms of yourself in ministry. And so I wanted to do that program, and so I was accepted to that my 4th year at Fort Hood. And I did 2 quarters in the hospital and 2 quarters in the Marriage and Family Center. And of course, all this is under supervision by experienced chaplains. At the end of my 4th year at Fort Hood, I was given orders to go to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey for the advanced course. And one thing about the military is they have a ton of education that they offer to you, and most of the time it's assigned, but sometimes you can ask them to go to something, and if they've got the money, they usually will fund it. So at Fort Monmouth, I was there 6 months. I remember it was a cold winter, and I was glad when the spring came. We were on orders next for Germany, and so off we go this time as a family to Erlangen, Germany. There was a post there called Ferris Barracks, and it was the home of the 1st Armored Division. So again, I'm with combat troops. And as they would go out in the field and do maneuvers in the German forest, it was the most beautiful place I think I'd ever seen, the way that the forests are there in Germany. After Erlangen, the 3 years that I did there, we returned to the United States and was assigned this time to Fort McLeroy, Alabama. And I had asked to be an instructor at one of the service schools I wanted to teach. And all our service schools, like infantry, military police, chemical corps, engineers, all the service schools have a chaplain on there faculty that teaches a variety of subjects and also does the ministry to soldiers. So I was given permission to go to Fort McClellan, Alabama. However, I was not given the further assignment to teach because they needed a pastor at the main post chapel, and I did that for about a year and a half before I could get over to the military police school and be the chaplain instructor there. And at military police school I taught sergeants, warrant officers, and officers, both newly commissioned officers, the young lieutenants right out of college, as well as captains who were back for their advanced course. And I taught stuff like stress management, counseling, ethics, leadership, all these different things. I enjoyed teaching and answering their questions. And in the afternoons I'd go over to one of the chapels, and I had an office there, and there I would do counseling. So it was a perfect world for what I wanted to do in terms of teaching and doing counseling. So my 3 years at Fort McClellan came to an end, and this time the phone rang and the Chief of Chaplain's office out of the Pentagon called and asked if I'd like to go to a year of civilian schooling, and which means you've got to go to some university and earn a master's. And at first they said they wanted me to study ethics. I said, no, I've been teaching ethics and I don't want to get a master's in ethics. That didn't sound well at all. I said, how about pastoral counseling? So they called me back the next day and said, sure, you can do it. Go to any place you want to in the United States. And I looked at all the places, and the best school that had the best pastoral counseling was none other than Columbia Theological Seminary in Decatur, Georgia. So off I go to Decatur, Georgia, and I'm enrolled there and thoroughly enjoyed it. I was a major by then, and since Atlanta was my home, my family had opportunity to have time with extended family. So that was a good year and a good training, because in the morning we'd be in class and we'd do all our classwork. In the afternoon after lunch and in the afternoons we would do counseling over at a place called the Georgia Association for Pastoral Counseling. And so you would do counseling, but you get supervision around how to improve it. So I did that for a year and graduated there with a Master of Theology in Pastoral Counseling. Then I was given an assignment to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Once they give you this training, you get that master's degree in a specialized field. They want to use you in a specialized way. And so my special assignment was to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and I was to be the post pastor as well as the pastoral counselor for the installation. So I was doing two things, mostly of preaching, leading the parish there, and doing counseling during the weekdays. Fort Leonard Wood is located right in the middle of Missouri. Soldiers have a unique way of describing most anything, and they said Fort Leonard Wood really should be called Fort Lost in the Woods. And it's about an hour and a half from anything, and we used to tease the ladies as they assigned in there, the wives of the soldiers, that they'd go through mild withdrawal because of the isolation. So after about 4 years this time at Fort Leonard Wood, I was picked up to go to Fort Sam Houston, Texas. By then I was a lieutenant colonel, and I was off to Health Services Command there at Fort Sam Houston. It's basically the command that looks after all the Army hospitals. So I was the deputy to a full colonel, and I did things like personnel assignments, training, scheduling training, conducting training for chaplains, and handling problems, anything that would come up in my area of responsibility. There's five, or at least in those days there were five major Army installations that had wonderful hospitals like Walter Reed and Eisenhower Medical Center and places like that. And so my job was to communicate with these chaplains that were in charge there, and to help them with whatever way we could from the headquarters. Did that for about 2 years, and this time the phone rang from the Pentagon again and said, congratulations, you've been chosen to be a division chaplain to go to Korea to the 2nd Infantry Division, and you're going to be there 13 months. The chaplain that was presently in the job evidently had to leave the job, and so I was chosen. Most of the time it's a 11 to 12 month assignment, but with fulfilling the last part of his obligation plus my own would mean 13 months. So I got to Camp Red Cloud. Camp Red Cloud is located in a little village called Uijambu. It's about 15 minutes away from the DMZ. And while I was there, I would visit soldiers scattered around. Since I was a senior chaplain, I had about 17 chaplains to look after 20,000 soldiers. And so we stayed pretty busy. We would offer worship services wherever the soldiers were, and we would do a ton of counseling trying to help them with problems back home. It seems like a recurring problem when soldiers are deployed. Everything back home has problems, and so that we were doing a lot of communication back to the States, trying to make sure that people have what they need back there, the families back there would be cared for. This assignment as division chaplain meant I was responsible for my chaplains, and we did things like suicide prevention. Suicide is unfortunately, it's a real threat in the military. It's become more of a threat, as we've heard in these last years of war. But my chaplains and I were doing a lot of suicide prevention workshops, basically training the leadership to spot certain things in their soldiers and how to perhaps respond more empathic to them. So Korea was a good assignment. In the evenings, I would meet in what they call the Commanding General's Mess. That's what they call a place that you eat. And so we were over there at night, and it had like a dining room to it for the officers, but this is the division officers' headquarters. And then they had a great big, what they call a day room, which has a couple of pool tables and a bar and things like that. It's kind of the day room of the division headquarters. That really became my place of ministry in the evening, because I would go over there and after dinner hang around with soldiers playing pool. I even picked up a few skills on learning how to shoot pool, and they'd approach you with different things, and so you were there. And the ministry of the chaplain a lot of times is called the ministry of presence, where we try to be there wherever the soldiers are. And if a soldier deploys someplace, there's a chaplain going along with that unit, and there's chaplains back in their installation looking after their family members as well. This assignment turned out to be the best assignment in my military career. Although I was far from home and missed my wife and 3 children, it was in terms of meaning and having a real world mission, for me at that time, it was an important place to be. Going up to the DMZ, that border, and looking across into North Korea and seeing their propaganda and their giant flags playing, and also the guards that they've got to keep their people in, is a sobering wake-up call for any soldier that sees that. And so the mission of this division was to basically be there in case the North Korea invaded. And so a lot of times the soldiers up there on the DMZ had, again, a neat way of identifying their mission. And they said that their mission was going to be like being bugs on the windshield. They said if North Korea decided to go and attack South, they didn't have much that they could do to stop them. Although if you talk to General Abrams, definitely he could stop them. After Korea, I had several other assignments. I was promoted to full colonel. I was a post chaplain at Fort Gordon and Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I was picked up and attended the Army War College, and as I look back in these 30 years, the best thing about military service was the people that you meet and the educational opportunities that you're given, and just having the fun of your life doing what you like to do. And so I enjoyed being a soldier and being a chaplain with these people. The worst part of the job was death notification, where I'd have to go out and tell a family member that their loved one had been killed either in combat or in training, because we did lose a lot of soldiers in training. So doing death notifications and doing funerals was never something that any chaplain looked forward to doing. Well, I think I'm about out of time. I've enjoyed rattling on here about my calling and my service in 30 years. After I retired in '05, I wanted a small parish, no staff, just one secretary. So I came to Reidsville and pastored the First Presbyterian Church of Reidsville for about 12 years. I thought I'd retire again, and I did. And then Sid asked me to come down and be a parish associate, and I was delighted to hear that. I'm here a couple of days a week, and I do counseling out at the Presbyterian Counseling Center 1 day a week. So it's kind of a perfect world for me. I tell everybody I have my work week is 3 on and 4 off, which is not a bad deal. So I'd entertain questions, but I don't think you can talk back to me now. But anytime you do have them, please let me hear from you. You folks have a good day. Bye-bye.